And we've got two great guests in studio. Talk about tonight's City Council meeting. It is Shelton Mayor Bob Rogers and Deputy Mayor Deidre Peterson. Good morning to you both.
Good morning, Jeff.
Thanks for coming on the air. Brought you on today to, again, promote and talk about the fact that the Shelton City Council has a meeting tonight, 7 p.m., at the Civic Center. First things first, how are things going in your guys' roles as mayor and deputy mayor? Enjoying things, getting out there in the community?
Yes, I'm enjoying it.
Absolutely.
Got to be fun.
Yeah.
It's
A different look probably than you guys are used to seeing the city from kind of behind the curtain. It's a Wizard of Oz reference there, seeing how
and personally, I'm still struggling. I was throughout private industry, so just the communication and things are just different.
Yeah,
You can't get everybody in the room and just talk. So
yeah, it is.
It's a little
There's
different.
a lot of rules and regs for sure. Also, want to bring you on to talk a little bit, see if you can explain to the residents one of the topics. There was a guest column in the Journal this week by Randy Lewis and Tom Lowe about the garbage contract with Mason County Garbage. We had seen this contract come into effect, and the services taken over from the city of Shelton with their garbage now to Mason County Garbage. I will say, just to get it out there, that Randy and Tom both have sat with me and presented what they have, I presume, talked with you guys about and will bring up tonight. So I had a little bit of understanding of from where they were coming from. A lot of this is fiscal, I believe, and it's a little complicated to understand, at least for me. Can you tell us if you're familiar with their concerns and how they'll be addressed tonight and what we can do with this Mason County garbage contract? Bob, I think you got some knowledge on this, right?
Yes, and first background, it was July of 17 where the city decided, after several years of study, to look at options for the city garbage service. And it was a good time because my understanding was they needed additional equipment. Some of the at least one of the trucks was about out, and they had one employee who was going to be retiring. So it was a good time to really look at it hard, and they did. And they came up with several options, and one of the options, well, there's three options. One, continue kind of as we were, expand the service, city service, or go out to contract. And based on their analysis, they went out to contract and completed contract with Mason County Garbage, I think effective July of 17. And that has, the way it was presented, I think it has some people a little ruffled, be the way I describe it. And I think talking to staff and myself, I think if city staff and the commission at the time of the new council did it over again, it would be presented differently. Part of the rate wasn't hidden. It wasn't called a utility tax. It was kind of added onto the base rate, even though the contractor was not going to receive it. It was going to go to the city. And that was resolved, I think, late last year, where they basically upped the utility tax to cover the difference between what the contractor is paid for his services and what the city receives. Moving forward, we're doing an amendment that's trying to clean up some of the language, and that's our goal as the new council. We're trying to clean up the contract so it's all clear, and there's no question on moving forward what the rates are.
It is fair to know that you guys both were not on the council or on the commission, I guess, at that point when all these decisions were made. So you guys are coming into this as well.
And one of the Randy's that group's issue is it's adjusted by CPI, and there's different CPI indexes around, and the current contract is adjusted on the Seattle, Tacoma, Bremerton CPI instead of the national average. And I've independently looked at that, and yes, it's a little bit higher, but over the course of the contract, it's a reasonable estimate of what a contract could increase. Maybe not in Mason County, but it's not unreasonable. I've looked at everything and said, is it unreasonable or reasonable? And most of the things all the things I'm coming to the conclusion, it's reasonable. Now, whether I do it that way, that's not the point. Is it a reasonable contract?
Meeting tonight at 7, and I understand there's going to be some extended periods for public comment to address some of these issues. Is that right, Deidre?
Absolutely. So one of the things that we felt very strongly is that there's been some confusion and some ruffling, as Bob indicated, over this issue. So we wanted to make sure that community members that had concerns or wanted an opportunity to speak to the council were able to do so. Certainly, there's a limit in terms of what we're able to change beyond the contract that is currently in place. But we want to make sure that we are all clear about what that contract means for us as residents, what it means for our neighbors, and that the current base rate is actually about, 20 cents lower than it was this time last year. So trying to make sure that the facts are out there and that we're all looking at the same book as we're moving forward in some of these decisions.
That's good. That's important.
I think a lot of times, too, if the citizenry, they may not get as into the minutia of these details, going line by line on their bill. They'll start getting concerned if
Right.
the garbage doesn't get picked up.
Right.
If those are the types of things that have happened. Overall, what is the mood in the city residents that you may be hearing about this garbage service versus how it used to be city run?
I've heard there's been some issues about turning off the service, but there's been no change on that as far as the city service, at least my understanding. I haven't heard any complaints. There's been some issues with when you see a 41.9% utility tax on it.
Sure.
There's been some questions on that, but
It's a bit shocking.
I've not heard on quality of service. I know personally, the city crews were great. They were extraordinary. And Mason County Garbage, I've had no issues, and I've not heard any quality issues as far as the service.
No.
You, Deidre?
No, and we actually reached out to Mason County Garbage, too, to just find out, have they been hearing any concerns? Because maybe it's not coming to us directly.
Sure.
And they've had a couple of the usual, I don't want the city to pick up my garbage. Can I dump my own garbage? And that's a separate issue from this. And so I'm trying to make sure that as we're looking at the contract itself and the services that our citizens are getting are done in a good way, and that service is being provided, and that we're just all above board about how this looks at
Sure.
and how we move forward.
So when somebody gets the bill on there and a breakdown, does it just say utility tax 41%? Is there no subcategories for that? I mean, I can see how that would be a shocking number.
I should have brought my file. I'm going from memory. I think it has just 41.9%.
Okay.
And the city, I'll be honest, the city views that as kind of two components. One is when the city had the service, there was a 5% utility tax on the city charge. So there's kind of a 5% historical utility tax in there, and this additional 36.9%, which is really the difference between what Mason County Garbage was charging and some of the indirect costs that the city recouped through that additional utility tax.
Okay.
The other, you want to keep
go
going?
on. Keep going.
And kind of on that 36.9, the one thing, the other issue, and I had an issue with this too, is when they initially did that contract, that additional revenue was coming to the city, and it was basically to fill in for services that was being provided to the city service, for payroll, for finance, things like that. And I question, well, if the service is gone, should we reallocate what those people do? And they basically were catching up on things that we're behind on. And now with our financial issue, that the whole thing is being looked at. So we're reallocate, or I assume the staff's going to come up forward with some reallocation of basically the whole budget.
Right.
So that question kind of goes away at this point because of this issue we're in, that we're going to have to look at everything at this point.
Right.
We got to pool the revenue and
Sure.
what are our critical services.
And there are still some indirect costs to the city, especially with the way that it's set up right now. So if someone doesn't pay their garbage bill and it goes through Mason County Garbage, and after a couple of cycles they still haven't paid, Mason County shuts off that service. But because city residents are required to have city garbage service, that debt is then transferred to the city, and the city is responsible to bill and collect for that. So it'll then show up on their water and their water sewer bill from the city. So there is a billing accounting aspect on the city's behalf, and at that time a new account is opened with Mason County Garbage, and service continues because our residents are required to have that service.
Interesting.
Okay.
And just to be upfront, that's one of the issues that some people have an issue with is potentially the city could shut off water service because at that point they're not paying their utility bills, and that's been
Right.
when the city had the service, that was the case. And it's just a little bit odd because we have
A
private
subcontractor.
contractor
Yeah.
doing some of the work, but the city's still performing that function because it is a city service that's required.
And I think that's a really important point, is that the city did not get out of the garbage business. We just aren't the ones physically going around in trucks and picking it up. So
Okay.
the city is still ultimately responsible. We just have a contractor providing that service, which I believe the hope at that time was that it was a more efficient model, a more cost-effective model. And certainly that's something we'll continue to look at. But it's a very complicated issue. I really appreciate Bob particularly has spent a lot of time with city staff digging into this and getting into the weeds. And all of us are trying to make sure that we are really knowledgeable about this topic so that we can speak with anyone who has concerns or questions. It's something that is a bit shocking, and we want to make sure that we're clear on our messaging about that.
Very good.
Jeff, I'll just add one more
Yes.
thing, and you're going to find this out, I think, about this council. We're really into doing our due diligence on issues, and just we'll probably delay the vote on this tonight because the amendment that was presented in the packet was not fully. There's an old version, and it didn't get properly amended or published, so that will probably delay that just because we do not want to vote on something that's just out there.
Yeah.
It's not a slight change. It's a slight change, but it's still something we don't want to vote on or have out there on the night that is presented. So.
For a matter of transparency.
Good to know.
Right.
So again, the Shelton City Council meets tonight at 7 at the Civic Center on 5th and Coda, and one of the aspects of the meeting tonight will be a conversation with some public input opportunity about the solid waste contract with Mason County Garbage. Deidre Peterson, Bob Rogers, thank you so much for coming on and
Yeah,
explaining this a
thank
little
you.
bit more
Thanks,
for
Jeff.
us.